Well, hello. Thanks for popping in for another random curiosity here at Bodkins Curiosity Shop. I am your shopkeeper, Chris Baker, and I wanted to talk in this really brief random curiosity about the new season of American Horror Story NYC. It just wrapped up here late last week, and I have been a fan of the American Horror Story franchise, although some seasons I've liked better than others, and I don't know. There are very few like full seasons I've enjoyed every aspect because American Horror Story they have a bad habit of flip-flopping timelines and just convoluting stories which should be scary by themselves without too much complication. And I think that's probably where American Horror Story really has some of its biggest missteps, when it tries to make things too complicated with multiple stories involving multiple timelines. And probably where American Horror Story works best is in shorter seasons. That's why I liked last year's double feature season. I liked that both stories were quite short, 6 and 4 episodes respectively between Red Tide and Death Valley. That's why for the most part, I've liked the American Horror Stories anthology series, because it's easy to make horror good in a shorter time frame, in a shorter amount of time. You have to be really on your game to make horror last for a full movie or for a full 10 episode season. And some of these stories I don't think the story by itself can't accommodate a full 10 episode season. And that's why you get some kind of mixed reviews with some of the other seasons, which I have enjoyed for the most part. I wasn't a big fan of the Coven season. I can't take that much Stevie Nicks. But for the most part, the other seasons I've enjoyed mostly. Like I said, though, a lot of those seasons do get a little convoluted because, like I said, they're jumping around with multiple stories covering multiple time periods. And that's where things get a little dicey. So when I found out they were doing this new season of American Horror Story NYC, you can really tell by the artwork and the movie posters, if you will, that they came out with leading up to this, that this was going to involve a lot of leather, a lot of BDSM sort of storyline. It wasn't until you get into it that you realize this story really is about the gay community. And of course, Ryan Murphy is a gay man. And while that is involved in a lot of the other storylines in the various seasons throughout American Horror Story, they've never focused like a full season on the gay community. And as a stereotypical red-blooded American straight male, a show like this or a season like this should probably push me away. But I'm open-minded enough. I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot because I've enjoyed American Horror Story up until now, and I'm not going to let this sort of subject matter scare me away, quote unquote. So I was interested to see where they were going to go with this, because the cast seemed really strong, and notably, for the most part, an all-gay cast. I think all of the principal male characters are gay in this series or in this season, and they're played by gay actors. So, I think that's important. I think inclusion, I think diversity, I think, telling a story from other people's perspectives that aren't mine is important in horror and genre. So, I was all on board for giving this a fair shake. I mean, it's American Horror Story. Usually, no matter how good or bad a season is in American Horror Story, it's always an interesting idea and always has some elements of horror that I can subscribe to and I'm on board with. I enjoy watching different characters and creatures and things like that. The problem with this season is that there was none of that. And that was probably why I ultimately didn't like this season. I was afraid in watching this that if I didn't like it, people were going to think, oh, he doesn't like it because it's all about the gay community. Well, no, that's not it at all. I didn't like this season because it just was boring. It had no real supernatural elements to it, and any supernatural elements they had to it were just done so piss poorly. The Big Daddy character was just, I get it. It's a metaphor, and we'll kind of go into that here briefly, but it was just done so horribly that it wasn't scary. And that's ultimately what you have these two main antagonists, these two killers. One is the Mai Tai killer, played by Jeff Hiller. The character, I mean, he does a good job with the character. He does bring some menace to this character, some, unsuspecting menace to the character, but the character really feels like a villain from Dexter. And then you have this leather-clad, hulking brute of a character called a Big Daddy. And I don't know as if you never see him without the mask, so I don't really know. I mean, it's a character played by Matthew William Bishop, but you never really see him without the mask, and he never really talks or anything like that. But this character looks like Lord Mungus from The Road Warrior, Mad Max 2. So you have these two kind of parallel storylines. You have this serial killer going around New York City killing gay men, and then you have this kind of B story with Billie Lourd. She's a scientist, and she's on this island off the coast of New York. The deer population, there's this new disease that is detected, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a metaphor for AIDS. No, it was AIDS. This whole season was really about the rise of the AIDS epidemic and the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. You had this Lord Mungus wannabe, the Big Daddy character, was essentially just a metaphor for AIDS. You had a lot of imagery with these deer and them culling the deer population to try and keep, this disease from spreading to humans, and you get a lot of imagery of gay men who have died from this disease later on in the series, and they have deer antlers, and the deer really are a metaphor for AIDS victims and the fact that they were essentially allowed to die to keep this under control. And just there's a lot of metaphor for AIDS in this, and that really is what this whole season is about. And it's about the plight of the gay community, how the plight of the gay community falls on deaf ears, whether it's the police, whether it's the media. You've got gay men being killed by this serial killer, the Mai Tai killer, and nobody's taking it serious. Nobody's doing anything about it. And throughout this whole season, set in the early 80s, it felt very much the early 80s, but ultimately there is no real horror in this. The horror in this season of American Horror Story is the real horror of the AIDS epidemic. And don't get me wrong, it was horrible back in the 80s when it really kind of exploded. It's horrible today for anybody that has AIDS. It's a horrible thing. It was a horrible thing for the gay community. It still is. And while that is horror of a certain type, American Horror Story, it hasn't been about real horror. Like I said, this is real life horror, which, we get enough of that every day. When you go to watch a show like American Horror Stories, you're looking for fantasy. You're looking for supernatural monsters and things of that nature. Things that, while it can have some metaphor to the real world, it takes us out of the real horrors of everyday life and shows us different types of horrors, more fanciful horrors. And when you take that fantasy out of it and you're just showing me real life, this didn't play like a season of American Horror Story. This played like a docudrama depicting the rise of the AIDS epidemic and the plight of the gay community. And in that sense, I suppose it was still boring. But it would have been, I think, more palatable as a viewer if it would have just been labeled as that. If they would have done this as a limited series and called it something else. But as American Horror Story, it didn't really feel like American Horror Story, because there was no horror that we are used to in this. And I get it. I'm sure there's people going to be bitching and moaning, but that's real horror. Yeah, no, I understand that. But we've never seen this type of real horror in American Horror Story before, so why start now? It just didn't make for a good season of American Horror Story. It made for a good drama. Again, like I said, it was quite boring, but at least it would have made more sense as a standalone drama of some sort. Because for all of its faults, the boring aspect of it, the fact that like the last two episodes, like the last episode felt like a bad 80s MTV video with a lot of imagery and metaphor with the Gino Borelli character and all he's going through at the end of this. It was just hard to watch. There are so many times where I'm like, oh my God, please, Lord, let this end. I just want this to be over with so I can talk about it and be done with this season. The dialogue was just so horrible at times. And that's what you get when you get multiple writers. And you had Our Lady J was a big part of the writing of this season, especially the last half of the season. And Our Lady J, they're responsible for one of the worst episodes of American Horror Stories, that milkmaid abomination. So I can't blame the whole thing on Our Lady J, but at least the last half of the season, Our Lady J had a hand in the writing that I can't imagine part of the problem was that. But even from the first episode, there was just, like I said, a lot of bad writing. There was some decent writing, don't get me wrong, but there was just some bad dialogue. Sandra Bernhard stuff was just unbearable to listen to. I've never been a fan of her as an actress. She's a funny comedian, but as an actress, I don't think she's that good. But for all its faults, all the boringness, the things that just were like, okay, this is some heavy-handed metaphor, and sometimes it wasn't even metaphor, it was just heavy-handed symbolism. For all of the things I didn't like about this season of American Horror Story, the one thing I really did like was the cast. I thought the cast was fantastic. Russell Tovey, who plays Patrick, of course you know him, the British version of Being Human, was probably the first place I saw him. He did a spectacular job. Joe Mantello, while he did a good job as an actor in this, the character was written so unlikable that at the end, when Patrick, his lover, is dead and he's just going through the motions of dealing with the aftermath, I just don't care, because he's been such an insufferable asshole this whole season that I didn't care about the Gino character when I should have. It should have been emotional and moving, and he was such a dickhead to Patrick leading up to that, whether he was right or wrong. He was an asshole, and I didn't care about him. Now, Joe Mantello did a fantastic job as this character. He did a good job with the character in and of itself. Charlie Carver as Adam Carpenter was really good. Isaac Powell as Theo Graves, I really liked his performance. He was probably one of the more likable characters. The Adam character is likable, just very annoying, but the Theo Graves character was really, really likable, and just the things that happen to him are so tragic. Zachary Quinto as Sam Zachary Quinto is such a fantastic actor, and of course a Pittsburgh native, so I'm sure I don't know if he's a Steelers fan, but I have to imagine just being a Pittsburgh boy, that's good enough for me. Billy Lord was okay. I think a lot of the problems I had with her character was in the writing, because sometimes her character was written really well and other times not so well. And those times where the dialogue just wasn't that good, she couldn't save it. So I have to really put any problems I had with her character, I have to lay that on the writing and not so much her. Leslie Grossman, who I'm not a big fan of. She's quite annoying. Not as a person, but I mean, her characters are usually quite annoying. But she even, there were some scenes where I was like, oh, she did a really good job. I wasn't annoyed to high hell from this character. But yeah, you spend most of the season with this mystery that they don't help you find. They don't give you any red herrings. They don't give you any clues as to what could be causing this outbreak, these murders, the Lord Mungus Big Daddy character, what he's doing. You don't have any idea until bam, they lay it all right out for you. And the Mai Tai killer segment is over, just over halfway through the season. He's dead in episode 7. And then the last 3 episodes, they're on Fire Island, and you had the Lord Mungus stuff. I keep calling him Lord Mungus. He looks like Lord Mungus from Road Warrior. But the Big Daddy stuff, that they don't really explain it until the very end. I mean, it's obvious, like I said, metaphor for AIDS, but they don't even wrap that up in a good way. One of the episodes, I think it was Requiem Part 1. I think that was the 9th episode, was just, that was the one where Our Lady J wrote the whole episode. And the one character, Patrick, says, "Where am I?" And I said, "You're in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol," because that's what it was. It felt like a huge ripoff of Charles Dickens and the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. My wife was half paying attention on her phone on the couch beside me when I said that about A Christmas Carol, and she's like, "Yeah, I was catching some Christmas Carol vibes with this too." So all in all, I wanted to like this season because it's American Horror Story, and I've liked every season in varying degrees of how much I liked it, but I've found something I liked in each season. And this one, there's just really nothing for me to like as a horror story. I mean, this is certainly a drama. It's certainly real life horror, but I don't watch American Horror Story to get real life. I watch it to get supernatural horror. I watch it to get good serial killers and not a Dexter villain reject. That's no commentary on the actor. I thought the actor was good. Just the character that was written for him felt like a Dexter villain that they didn't want to use. Or it felt like it was little parts of various Dexter villains all put into one character. There's no horror. It was hard to get through it sometimes just because it was so damn boring and without getting you anywhere, without helping you figure out what's going on or what you're even watching. And like I said, a lot of the heavy-handed metaphor was just, I felt like I was being beat over the head. Yeah, I get it. I get what's going on. Just advance the plot, for God's sake. And as I said, the only real saving grace this season had was the acting. The story was, it was just like too little butter spread over too much bread. Anything supernatural they did was done poorly and wasn't scary at all. Any horror elements, supernatural or otherwise, were just not done very well. There was at no point in this that I was actually scared or found anything even remotely scary. Maybe some scenes in the Sentinel episode when we're coming to the climax of the Mai Tai killer storyline. There was some of that was like, yeah, that's pretty good. That wasn't horrible, but for the most part, there was a lot not to enjoy and very little to enjoy about this season of American Horror Story. And that's not a commentary on the subject matter. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in the gay community that are really going to attach to this because it is about the gay community and the hardships and the troubles and the prejudices and on all the things that community has gone through from back in the early 80s when this is set to today. And I get that and I empathize with that. But it just didn't make for a very scary horror story when you banked too much on the real life horrors being the driving force in what scares people. I think this is a story that could have been done with the same effect and the same issues being tackled, the AIDS epidemic, like I said, the plight of the gay community. I think there was a way you could have done this season and tackled all those issues, but done it in a subtle metaphor that involved something supernatural, involved like real scares, real monsters, what have you, but make the metaphor in that and just don't be so literal with this. So like I said, this was a great drama. Just wasn't a good, scary horror story. But don't take my word for it. If you haven't watched it, go check out American Horror Story NYC. I know this is going to be a very divisive season. People are either going to love it or they're going to hate it. I didn't like it. It wasn't my cup of tea, but that's not because of anything other than the fact that it wasn't a horror story. It was a drama about real life things. And to me, that's not American Horror Story. So I want to thank everyone for listening. Like I said, go check it out for yourself and see what you think. Maybe you'll like it more than I did. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll not like it as much as I didn't like it all that much. So I don't know how you could like it any less than I did. But I want to thank everyone for listening. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram, Odds Bodkins Curiosity Shop, and wherever you listen to this podcast, follow it, subscribe to it, download it, and give us a review. 5 stars would be awesome. But whatever review you leave us, we do appreciate it. So until next time.